Hey, how you doing, Francesca?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Um,
It's
how is everything with you?
yeah, good. I'm glad it's cooled down a bit. I know that you're here in New York as well. Back in New
Yes,
York, aren't you?
yes, exactly. Yeah, I was there. I see people joining. Yes, I was in the heat of Italy for a while there with the 100, I don't even remember in Fahrenheit what it was. I think a day when I was there was the 106. I think that's the hottest I've ever been in, while knowing how
Wow,
hot it was. I probably was
wow.
in
No,
hotter
that's
weather. I just didn't know it was, I didn't check the weather.
I
So,
did. I did hear recently. I think that the hottest ever recorded temperature in Europe was in Sicily or something like in a few weeks back. So
yeah, yeah, I
sounds
heard
like
that
you.
too. I got out before that happened. I left before that. I got out on time.
It's funny to think there's places hotter than New York has been, because it's, to me, coming from Bristol and England, this has been a pretty tempestuous, hot, humid, swampy summer. But my wife and my other friends in the city tell me that it's not even been that hot. So I'm still coming to terms with that.
Yeah, I think so. But
Ah, so I was just going to say you're originally from Italy. Whereabouts are you from?
I'm from the south. This region called Puglia. It's right across from Greece and Albania, depending on which height you go to in Puglia. It's really that. It's kind of like the spur and the heel of the boot, if you see Italy as a boot. But yeah, um, yeah. But I've been here for a long time,
Okay.
obviously. Yeah,
Did you? Yeah, I mean, do you get to go home very often?
yeah. I mean, like with COVID, has been hard, right? Traveling was a little bit difficult, but I can complain. Yeah.
No, that's cool. Okay, no, that's nice. And did you move over here to the US for education reasons or for work, or was it just a natural kind of transition?
Yeah, so I went to college in the United States, which at the time was quite unusual for Italian people to do. I'm not sure why or how, it was somewhat accidental. So I went to college in Boston and I study art and art history. So I
Mhm.
study like art making and I focus on performance art in this and art history. Um, and it's interesting that from then on, although I enjoyed both of them, I really realized I wanted to work more in a museum setting or working with archive and collections as opposed to making the actual work. So I gravitated towards art history more. And it was a while until I found fashion study as a field, although I was always interested in the body, performance, and dress, right, and textiles. But I just couldn't quite land on something that would me study all of them together. So I did my master's in film studies here at NYU, and then I still was kind of searching for the right kind of PhD. And I was very lucky because I saw Valerie Steele speaking at a conference organized by Eugenia Paoluccelli a long time ago. And I was really impressed with her. I never heard who she was. I mean, this is before really the internet was a big thing. And so I just wrote her a letter saying that I wanted to intern with her or work with her. And then she called me. She was very kind. She called me to do some work on this Italian fashion exhibition she was organizing at the Museum of FAT. And then she taught me all about the field of fashion study. I mean, not all, but she taught me that it existed, how to get a PhD in it. She literally still had a Rolodex, and she went through a Rolodex and gave me the contacts that I needed to, you know, for to get in touch for a PhD application. So I was really lucky in that sense.
That's
Um,
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
I did read a bit about your pathway through academia, and this does seem like you've had a really interesting one, and have had the opportunity to study or work in many different disciplines. So what was it then that really drew you to fashion? Was it the ability to look at so many different elements, and look at fashion through all these different other lenses. What was it that really drew you to fashion?
I mean, I think it was all that, right? It had um, body, and the embodiment was central to it, and that's really what I keep writing about in one way or the other. But it was also about the object, and coming from an art historical background, that was interest to me, the designed object, had to do with material culture, the textiles. So it kind of had everything. And of course, it had to do with images, right? And having studied film studies, I was obviously quite interested, as well as art history, in that. So it had everything in one package. And I think it happens a lot to people who end up in these new fields like fashion studies. Once you find them, you're like, oh, that's exactly what I was trying to do all along. And I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know what exactly it was. So it is, but now it's obviously a different kind of, your search is probably going to take a lot less. I mean, there is like so many more journals than when I started. When I started, literally, there was only fashion theory. And now, like with intellect, there's like, I mean, yeah, a number of more journals in the field of fashion studies, more books, more programs, and just a greater visibility all along. So I feel like, yeah, it has changed notably in terms of people's awareness of it, and I think that's quite great. Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, I think in recent years there's been a huge proliferation in fashion scholarship, fashion theory, and fashion criticism, all these different elements. And I guess you're right. I mean, intellect's definitely sort of accidentally been at the forefront of some of those developments through our journal program, for sure. And there's many other publishers who've been working and doing wonderful work in fashion. But I guess you wrote the first anthology of fashion criticism. You were the editor of that project, if I'm correct. And
yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to ask about this term fashion criticism and what it means to you, and if you think it's important in light of all the recent developments. I know you've spoken and other people speak about fashion just being part of cultural, sort of, I suppose, cultural criticism, or
Right.
urban anthropology, the term you hear thrown around quite a bit these days as well. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, and whether you think that fashion criticism is a discipline that's really important in its own right and that we need to sort of stick to.
Right. So yeah, the anthology I did looks at fashion criticism as part of cultural criticism. It does primarily anthologize things that have been written in media. So it doesn't look at criticism that's been produced in academic writing, or exclusively academic writing, right? So it does take a point of view also to just make it into a manageable amount of work. But I think I got interested in fashion criticism again because my partner is music critic, and I do a journal called Fashion Project. And so I kind of was somewhat exposed or somewhat interested in media. And I was just noticing that there was really little literature, especially at the time. I think now things are, again, I picked up a little bit on fashion criticism. And I went to, really, this journal I did was, and is only interview based. So so I went and contacted all these fashion critics and asked them to be interviewed for the journal. And I think that responses about their discipline, about their work, about the way fashion criticism was positioned in wherever they were working, be it digital media or print media at the time. And I found like they were really excited to talk about their field. And also they were very aware that this was done, almost 10 years ago now. They were very aware that the field was not taken as seriously as other fields of cultural criticism. And so they were keen on changing the perception and showing how an important part of culture fashion was through the writing. So that's what led me to do the anthology. And the anthology is not just contemporary writer, it goes back to the 19th century, to people like Oscar Wilde, etc. I mean, I was able to anthologize work in English exclusively. So really US and UK primarily.
What were some of the other, tell us a bit more about some of the other critics or writers that you anthologized in that particular project? Got a little bit of a time lag. Well, while Francesca comes back to us, welcome everybody to In Conversation today. I'm very pleased to have Francesca Granata with me. We'll be discussing fashion criticism and some projects. Oh, you're coming back? We've got a little bit of an internet lag.
Yeah.
I was just, while you were, sure, I was just welcoming everyone who's joining us. Well, we seem to have a bit of a lag, bit of an internet issue perhaps. So thanks everyone for joining. If anyone has any questions, please type them in the comments section and I'll put them to Francesca. Can you hear me now, Francesca?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. I was just wondering if you wanted to highlight any of the other writers or periods, critics that you anthologized in that particular project. Just because it was, I've not had a chance to read it myself, but it sounded very interesting from what I have read.
Yeah, I mean, so the project obviously anthologizes the people that you expect to be in it, like people like Robin Gibbon, Vanessa Friedman, or Sarah Mower. So the kind of big critics of the early 21st century, so to speak. But I was also able to find people that wrote about fashion and wrote fashion criticism, and we're not primarily known, and we're not primarily fashion critics. And that's some of the most interesting finds, I think. Like some of the people I found whose work I thought was amazing, and it's not as recognized as it should be, especially in terms of their fashion criticism, are people like Babe Moore Campbell, who is or was, she passed away quite young at 50, and that's probably one of the reasons she's not as well known, who wrote great fashion criticism, so for Ebony and Essence,
okay.
to publication that were started, one in the 50s and the other one in the 70s, and they were really meant for a Black American audience. And her work was really well written. I mean, she's primarily known as a fiction and nonfiction writer, so not as a fashion critic, but I thought her work was amazing. I was able to include it in the book. And then there's other people that are also known as primarily fiction writer, like Angela Carter, who's the surrealist. Yeah, she's English. Surrealist writer who wrote like great fashion criticism for what's now known as the New Statesman, and Susan Sontag, that wrote fashion criticism for Vogue. And interestingly enough, this piece that she wrote for Vogue on photography, fashion photography and fashion, was never anthologized in her several essay collections. So I thought that was really interesting too, that, I mean, she's so widely regarded that this one article was never reprinted. So that also speaks to the fact that fashion is still in some way not as, still lagging behind a little bit at least.
The ugly stepchild of the academy, I've heard one person describe it as still, which I thought was kind of peculiar. Do you draw much of a distinction between fashion criticism and sort of more highbrow fashion journalism? Do you see one as being more academic, or are they kind of interchangeable? Because it seems like there's a lot of quality fashion journalism out there, outside of the glossies and things which are more, I suppose, entwined with advertising.
Right. I guess there's like a huge debate in our criticism about one of the a lot of people claim that in order to be able to produce criticism, you have to have negative criticism, right? So that really does prioritize publications, just like general interest magazines, but also digital media that's not exclusively fashion related, because their ability to move negative criticism is greater than the glosses or digital media that's primarily fashion media. So yeah, that is something I took into consideration in the book. Yeah, we have a couple of questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'll read them out to you. So, one from Ariel, and okay. So, well, it's a little tricky to say this here. What are your thoughts about where fashion criticism is going post-blogger era? Will the pendulum swing back to looking toward more unbiased critics?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the blogger were good and bad, right? They just produce so much content, and
Yeah.
some of it. I mean, eventually they moved towards image only, and then as social media took over, that really the image became to dominate what was once the fashion blogs. But I think in that time, the amount of just thoughtful criticism produced and published in perhaps what we call legacy media has increased incredibly. I mean, like I was looking at sometimes, a fashion story would be not quite a, would just be so prominent in the New York Times and would be some of the most read story. And I think it is taken way more seriously also because it has this political edge now, and it's talks about representation and what's considered beautiful and what's considered an acceptable form of beauty. And fashion criticism together with fashion is really tackling with these issues. So I think it has entered the mainstream, so to speak, despite the fact that yes, there is a lot of like branded content out there as well. The two, I guess, coexist. Thank you, Ariel, for that question.
It's a good one. I'll get to Sarah's question in a second as well, but it's interesting you highlighted there. How do you see fashion and fashion criticism's place in affecting real change in the world right now? There's definitely been a lot of bandwagonism in from the fashion and beauty industry, and but do you think there's actually real representative change? And what can fashion? Oh, sorry, we got a little bit of a lag again. Thank you for your questions, everyone. I'll just wait for Francesca to rejoin. It's always New York where you get the worst connections. Okay, I'll try and bring Francesca back. Thanks, Sarah. I'll get to your question in a second. Yeah, I was going to ask a few questions about that book project too, because it really fascinates me. Okay, yeah, sorry guys, just had a little bit of an issue with the connection. I'll just try and bring Francesca back into the conversation. Please do share your questions for Francesca just in the comments section, and we'll get to them as soon as I can get her back.
Hi, sorry.
That's all right. Isn't it funny that we're both in New York and we've got terrible internet connections apparently?
I know. Doesn't surprise me so much, but
I've got that and the weather warnings flashing up in front of me as well, so I don't know what's going on.
But did you want to go to Sarah's question? Did you want to follow up on that issue of fashion
I know
criticism?
I'll go to Sarah's question, and then maybe we can come back to my question about sort of representation. So Sarah's question: following your book Experimental Fashion, what do you currently feel is producing the most experimental? Who do you think is currently producing the most experimental work that encapsulates the grotesque? Before you answer that question, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that book project as well.
Yeah, I'm not going to assume everybody knows about it. No, it's a book I wrote, now it's been a little while, a few years ago, and it looks at the 80s and 90s particularly, and the way there was a proliferation of grotesque images. So these images of the body out of bounds, in fashion, which was traditionally, up until that point, representing a more normative body, traditionally beautiful, sealed, etc. So classical, symmetrical, all these attributes. And then these designers, especially experimental designer and people working at the bridge between fashion and performance, questioned these bodies, these kind of bodies. They introduced, a different vision of the body, once that was really pushed bodily boundary, even kind of opened up the bodies. So following ideas of pregnancy, as well as a body that perhaps was considered, would not be considered beautiful within the standards of the 80s and 90s, right? And I think what I conclude in my book, that one of the reasons there was this proliferation of grotesque imagery in the period had to do with the advent of feminism, really starting from the 70s onwards. And so they question bodily beauty and bodily boundaries. And so these designers can be taught as feminist designer in some way, as well as the AIDS crisis, which really created this almost hysteria surrounding the body and body boundaries, and where there was a beautiful male body was a really important antidote to the fears of AIDS in the period. But yeah, so in the contemporary period, like really right now, I have noticed a lot of really young feminist designers that do incredible work. And they start, I think a lot of them, interestingly enough, work with stretch fabric, but also they start out with working within the realm of lingerie or undergarments, which is a totally fraught categories, and they're really questioning bodily boundaries, ideas of beauties in their work by starting with this fraught category. I mean, one of them is Michaela Stark, who is based in London. Another one is Sinead O'Dyer, also based in London. Both of them really work with also very interesting use of material. And then another one is depicts, which really talks about maternal bodies, pregnant bodies, bodies that breastfeed in her work in a very interesting way. And there is also other designers that in America that are exploring this stuff. One of them is Rebirth Garment, which is a collective based in Chicago. But yeah, so there's, I think, a slew of young feminist designers that are really talking about these issues in a contemporary way. And yeah, I thought it's so interesting. They're like working, a lot of them were working not only with stretch fabric, but really with the idea of lingerie and debunking what that is and what that is used for.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I would have to check out some of these designers.
Yeah.
I know in that first edition, you also, you focused on some celebrities as well, people like Lady Gaga with the meat dress.
Yeah.
Who would you, if you were to do a second edition, who would you kind of focus on from the world of celebrity, or which icons perhaps would you address now? Who would really intrigue you in terms
That's
of
a
using
difficult question. I mean, I think in some ways, although they really are not embodying the grotesque, I think, I mean, the Kardashians and the Jenners are such an interesting case studies in like these Instagram body types that they create that just proliferates everywhere, right? I mean, she's gonna have the skims, I think they're called. That again, like it has to do with lingerie and underwear, which is a big category, but it's much more compression. It's much more, I think, to achieve a silhouette that are like her, Kim Kardashian. So I think even though they're really quite opposite, they're really not pushing boundaries of beauty. They are really interesting in the way they dominate a sphere of what's beautiful and what's a beautiful body, and how it is created through all these levels of artifice, right, in the social media sphere. So I would definitely look at them at some level, though there's so many of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you feel like, how do you feel social media has impacted sort of fashion criticism? Because you were talking a little bit about the blogs previously and things like the street style and the sartorialist, and those things almost seem to be a little bit kind of outmoded now. But it seems like Instagram and influencers on Instagram,
Yes.
and then leading into people being able to create their own brands and sell their own content seems to be a big thing. I was wondering, do you feel that that's had a big influence on fashion criticism, or on the way we view it?
I don't know about, I mean, they definitely has a huge influence, right, on every aspect of fashion now that it's all of it, it really is mediated online, especially in the post-COVID era. And I think it's quite interesting how, like, you know, social media is both around as a place for great inclusivity, where voices that are marginalized can have a voice, but at the same time, there's been a lot of articles arguing that it also imposes unrealistic standards, and in actuality, the people that then tends to dominate social medias are often quite are often not the ones that are coming from marginalized background or are really questioning ideas of beauty. So it's a kind of, social media is this really interesting nexus that, you know, it has everything in it. And there's a really interesting article by Karen de Purchase about the influencer and the ideal of beauties, and how that's perhaps she's quite critical of the fact that social media has opened up the realm of what's considered beautiful. And I think she claims that actually has also had the opposite effect. So I think social media is a really interesting case studies for the changes fashion is undergoing. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose especially like fashion journalism and the way that we actually encounter designers, new work. In one sense, it's kind of democratized access to, you know, anyone can like check out one of these new designers if they have a social media, you know, page where they represent their work. You know, and then you can deal directly in that sense. Whereas I guess previously you had to, you know, be in a fashion capital, or you had to, you know, to be involved in the industry, or to read the more highbrow kind of journalistic content. So yeah, but it's interesting. It works in many different ways.
Yeah.
Well, look, I wanted to talk to. Sorry, did you have anything to add on that?
No.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a project that we'll be doing together, Ephemeral Encounter, an anthology of fashion projects. So that's going to be a kind of a book project, but an anthology, if you will. But I wanted to go back to how it started, which was, it's kind of, I think it's a very interesting, because it's a journal, really, wasn't it? But that you found it. And I'd just like to hear a little bit more about fashion projects, and you know, how it started, what your aims were, and maybe some of the themes that you focused on across a range of different issues.
Yeah, so it started a while ago. So it was started with the idea of being a zine, right? And I was really invested in being an actual object, so a print zine. And in 2005, I think I started, before I even went into fashion study more officially, so to speak. And it was always meant to be a series of interviews with people, right? So it would be a theme issued, and then we would go out and interview designers, curators, critics, and a range of creatives working in the field of fashion. And it's developed like from a zine into a journal, as also my interest shifted a little, but it's always been a really interesting kind of place to also test out ideas. And it's quite immediate in terms of its language, and it's quite accessible for vis-a-vis academic writing, because it is this Q&A format, right? And I think it was very excited to be interviewing people at different stages of their career, and really covering a huge range of issues, from, like, we interviewed the founder of Show Studio, and when Show Studio was first started, on, you know, the rise of digital media in fashion. And then on the other hand, we interviewed Harold Koda, who was curator at the Costume Institute, about connoisseurship. So it really kind of ran the gamut of topics and kind of people we were able to interview. And a lot of the issues had to do, as I said, with a theme. So there was one on fashion criticism, one on fashion curation, and some of the interviews were also done and run online, but many of them were run in the journal. And I'm really excited to be working on anthology of these interviews because I think they really trace the kind of, in a way, the boom of interest in fashion as a cultural product, as a cultural entity in the last 20 years. So the way that it went in the museum from being something that was there to being perhaps the most important aspect of a museum, right? Also in the media, I think the interest in fashion blew up within that period. So I think it's really an interesting indexing of these changes within the way fashion is perceived and talked about and consumed within the last 20 years. So that's what I'll be doing next.
That's right. And so how are you going to develop the book in terms of, will it be different to the original issues and themes? How are you going to structure it? What's the plan? Are you going to be adding new content?
Yeah, to some extent. I think there is certain things that are missing. So I might be adding some new interviews alongside the one that exists. But I think there is going to be a series of themes. One of them is fashion and performance. One of them has to do with fashion materiality. And then we look at fashion and curation in the museum. And so hopefully we'll give a kind of overview of the journal, but also of these important themes. And I think what's exciting about the Q&A format and the interview format is that it really allows for the voice of the speaker to come through. And I think it allows for a different kind of audience that's not just an academic audience to want to read it, I think.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's important, and it'd be interesting to try and span that gap between academia and more general journalism. Who would you really like to interview for the project? Who do you think is doing really interesting work now, or maybe give us a teaser of who you'd most like to kind of try and.
Well, I can't give it away. I can't give it away. What if they say no? But yeah, I think a lot of these. I think new designers. I would like to interview, but also I would like to, regardless, write about them now that I'm done with my first book project. So that's definitely something I would like to investigate. Yeah.
Cool. And in terms of representation, who do you think is doing some interesting work right now? Like, does anyone strike you as trying to change the game, as it were, and to try to be really forward-thinking and affect change?
Yeah,
through the work they do.
So many people are doing that work now. I mean, because I'm interested in representation of the body and feminism, that's whom I mentioned. But there is a lot of people that are also trying to kind of undo decolonializing fashion history and fashion theory, as well as fashion design in the last really 20 years. And it goes from designers to theorists, historians. I mean, there's one of our alumni from the program in the MA Fashion Study. Her name is Kimberly Jenkins. She has been doing that kind of work with this project called the Fashion Race Database, which is a kind of aggregate of resources that about fashion and race. She's currently a professor in Toronto. So she's doing that work, and she has been doing that work for a long time. I mean, there's scholars that have written really interesting histories and revisitation of tropes in fashion history through the lens of race. I mean, Monica Miller really I think, reinterpreted the idea of dandyism through the lens of race in quite a long historical span. So I think there is a lot of people, designers, and as I said, theorists and historians that are doing that work also in the US, right? I mean, the people that I talked about working with lingerie and feminism and the body are actually primarily in the UK, I noticed, but yeah.
It was interesting last week. My guest was Dory Tunstall from OCAD in Toronto, and did a special guest edited issue of one of our journals, Art, Design and Communication in Higher Education. And it was all about this issue of decolonizing art and design education. And do you think that's happening specifically in fashion then as well, but within an education context?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I think, a long process. But yeah, I think the fashion design education is trying to undo a lot of biases that existed in the way fashion education was developed. Especially, I'm talking about especially in the US, because that's a context in which I teach right now. I think at Parsons, it's quite interesting. They're hiring a new dean with the intent in the fashion design department. I'm not in the fashion design department, in the art and design history department, but with intent to really undo these biases that have to do with race, but in gender, but also able-bodiedness. His name is Ben Barry, and interesting enough, he also comes from Toronto. There must be something in Toronto. So I think the institution are starting that project. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we should say congratulations to Ben on his new position as dean there. Right. Ben's worked with our journal, Critical Studies in Men's Fashion, and we've published a book with him fairly recently as well.
Yes.
So yeah, where he's worked, he's doing some really good stuff. Oh, that's cool. So it's just, some things are getting shaken up a little bit at Parsons. I wanted to ask a little bit about, like, how is life at Parsons? You're back on campus now.
Yep. I mean, not right now, but,
no, but
yeah,
you know.
we're actually, I mean, our semester hasn't started yet, but we will be back in the fall. I mean, we're all pretty excited, or at least I can speak for myself, to be teaching in person. I mean, I like Zoom, but it's such a treat to see people in real life now. It didn't used to be, but now it's a treat. So yeah, so we're very excited to be in person, and yes, things are going well, I think. I haven't been back in a little while, so yeah.
How is it as well? It's like, because I've been to Parsons several times to visit with you and other people.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And I always love visiting the campus there. But it's kind of interesting. We talk about it being a campus, but it's really prominently there in Manhattan. And do you think that has a real impact on the? I know it's also a private institution, but do you feel that has like a real impact? Because every time I go there, it feels more like I'm going to like a design studio than a university. That's not the distraction.
Yeah, I really love that about it. I always found, I told you, I somehow accidentally ended up on an American campus when I was in college. And it was like a pretty urban campus. It was right outside of Boston. But then the second, within like a year, I was like, oh, I'm going to move to like an apartment off campus. There's something I do not like about campuses. I like to be in the midst and bustling of a city. So, and I think that's why the students go to Parsons. I think they are like, my undergraduate students in particular, they're so embedded in the culture and the activity of the cities. I think that's part of the appeal of Parsons and doing a design program there. So I think it has, it doesn't have the feeling of being away or in an ivory tower. I mean, I think it's also super nice to have campuses. It's just it's not for me. I don't like to be also surrounded only by students. So I think some people feel the same way or different.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got the fashion district's just down the road, and being in the heart of New York, it does feel, like when you're in there, it does feel like the whole thing is an extension of the city. And whereas these campus universities can feel a little bit like an ivory tower, or very separated from perhaps the realities that people are just teaching and discussing, which is always kind of interesting.
And everybody has their own likes and dislikes. Yeah.
Does it affect how you teach? Do you think? Like, do you have a special kind of?
We're so lucky because it's so easy to go to museums or to go visit something, right, or an archive, because they're right there. And I think that's one of the reasons people go to Parsons. I think it also allows them to do internships while they're doing school, and it's good and bad, right? There is a lot of distractions in normal times. I mean, last year was different. And so I think it is, on one side, you're much more enmeshed into the life of the city. On the other side, I mean, I'm sure it's hard to it's harder to focus if you're in New York as a 20 something than if you were like in the field somewhere. I don't know. Or maybe it hyper focuses you. Hard to say.
Maybe there's a lot of competition in the city, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
I have noticed like some of your students, they astound me. I think we've published two I think actual undergraduates from
Oh,
Parsons
that's so awesome.
in the past couple of years, which just shows that, well, one, there's a huge amount of get up and go, but then also just the standard and quality of someone who's writing when they're in their early 20s, without that much actual experience is quite incredible as well.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, look, the city is kind of back. So you talk of distractions. What distractions have you most missed during the pandemic? What are you getting up to now that you're back from Italy, or what are you looking forward to when you feel things are safe?
I mean, I was able to do pretty much most of the things I did before. I really kind of missed, I have to be honest, I think I might be a minority, but I miss being at work, like physically at work. I don't really like working from home. So I think I'm really excited to actually teach in person. I mean, it's also nice because we have a full-on vaccine mandates, mask mandates, test mandates, so it feels very safe. I mean, I would probably feel differently if all these things weren't in place. I mean, they have all sorts of mandates at Parsons. So I'm excited to be in a space that both feels safe and you're in person. So that's the thing that I miss the most, because I think, I mean, we were really lucky in New York. As you know, museums were open most of the year, galleries were open. I haven't gone to concerts, so that's something I look forward to. But everything else, I mean, I've been to concerts outside, so there's been so much you could have done even throughout the pandemic that, really the thing I miss the most is probably teaching in person. Yeah.
No, I went to the first concert since the end of 2019 last night, actually.
What did you see?
It was it's part of there's a series of free concerts in New York all week. I think it's called I forget what it's called, but it's basically, a lot of it's kind of like classic hip hop and funk and things. So last night it was EPMD and the Wu-Tang Clan, but in Staten Island on the beach, and it felt pretty safe. You had to have like a vaccination, and it could have been like 10,000 people there, but there was probably only around 1,000 or something. I mean, I'm not certain, but it felt pretty safe and spaced out. But yeah, it was a bit of a surreal experience, kind of going to festivals, ostensibly to a mini festival though, because I used to go to concerts every week, and having not been to one for like 18 months or more, it felt quite weird. But it was good fun. It was good fun. Dancing in person rather than in the kitchen. Once.
Right.
So,
yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah.
So yeah, there's some more on Thursday. There's another one on Thursday in Brooklyn, and then there's another one with Parliament Funkadelic in Queens. It's nice that all the different boroughs are kind of like showcasing, some great acts that have come from there. Some of the the golden oldies as well, which is nice, as maybe I haven't had a chance to.
Yeah.
So, and it's all free, so that's cool. Just the lottery. So if anyone's out there in the New York area, you just got to have your vaccination, and then you're good to go. So that's kind of I think. Well, yeah, and my wife and I were talking about maybe trying to go to the opera, because we've been talking about that for a couple of years, and it's like we never had the chance to do it. So I've never been, but my granddad was an opera singer, so I feel like I heard him sing obviously, but I never actually kind of have been to a grand opera. So I feel like that's maybe next on my hit list of things to do.
Yeah. That must be nice.
Try. I don't know. For me, I think it was also like there's been a lot of silver linings. I think, as well as a lot of tragedy. But it really did. I know what I missed, and also there's certain things that I put off for years, like going to the opera, that I feel like I should do. I'm looking forward to going back to the theatre for sure, definitely.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it does feel like things are getting back to some semblance of normality.
Sure. Yeah, that is exciting.
I was going to ask you a couple of kind of more fun questions, actually. If anyone does have any questions in the audience, though, Francesca, we've got her for a little bit longer. So do drop those questions in and we'll try to get to them. But yeah, I wanted to just ask you a couple of, you know, kind of like more general questions. In terms of fashion in your lifetime, what period most excited you, you know, in terms of style and in terms of just like the fashions of the time?
I oddly, even though I was just a child, I loved the 1980s.
Yeah.
I think I was also, at a time, I was living in Italy, and then fashion was so, in Italy was finally, I think that's when fashion in Italy was probably at its best, and I was highly impressionable because I was young. So I really enjoyed fashion then. I think the colors, the fact they were over the top, and there were all these designers. I mean, they were outside my price range, but I remember like loving Moschino, like when Franco Moschino was still designing, or people like Enrico Coveri. I mean, tragically, they all died. Both of them died of AIDS, but there was like this really kind of exciting moment. Even as a child, I remember being really into it. I wasn't that young. I mean, towards the end of the 80s, I might have been a teen. Hard to remember. But so I think it was just, for me, like an exciting period of fashion also, because maybe that's when I started to learn about fashion. So I still revisit some of the outfits of that time. And it's so weird how they came back in such a different, when they come back, they're so different, these brands, right? Like they become something else in their second iteration, third iteration by now. But yeah, it's oddly, I think it's also, it's like what fashion is in your youth, you're excited about. Oddly enough, I don't miss the 90s, which is when I was a teen and a young person. There's this one colleague that wrote this great book, and I think she's having an exhibition coming soon about 90s fashion. And I love her book and her exhibition, but I was like, I just couldn't. I don't really need to revisit, you know, obviously there's interesting experimental fashion, mainstream 90s fashion. I was like, yeah, I'm done with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I think maybe it's what you know, like growing up, you know, I suppose coming of age properly in the 90s, and then for me the 90s and the early 2000s. I guess fashion was like a lot of pressure, especially being at school, and then especially if you couldn't afford certain brands or certain designers and things like that. I look back on rose-tinted spectacles in some ways, but it's funny how things are cyclical as well, because I'm really annoyed that I got rid of some of those like wind cheaters and some of that sports gear, like the polo stuff and like that Tommy Hilfiger type stuff that like my cousins like gave to me, and like I didn't wear because it wasn't in my style when I was like, you know, in my early teens or whatever.
Sure.
And now that stuff's going for, you know, in every thrift store in Brooklyn, you know, people are like selling and buying all this old polo gear, and you can barely get your hands on it. So it's interesting how things are cyclical as well. And the 90s has definitely had a serious resurgence in recent years, I think.
Yeah, I think that's why Colin Hill is the colleague was talking about. She did the exhibition because it was obviously, I mean, it was also her coming of age period, but she's a bit younger than me. Cool. But yeah, so hopefully that will be at the museum at FIT soon. Yeah, there's so many exhibitions I'm looking forward to that were delayed or from COVID. That's another thing that's exciting. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, that sounds really cool. I'm going to definitely check that exhibition out. Are there any other exhibitions that you're looking forward to that people maybe can go and check out? Anything you'd recommend?
There's the Rose in Fashion. I haven't seen it yet, but it just opened at FIT, and I think it's Colin Hill again in collaboration with Amy Delahaye, I believe, from London. So I think that will be interesting. But as I said, I haven't seen it yet. But I mean, the Will Smith exhibition is still there, right?
Will Smith?
Yeah.
As in Will Smith, the actor musician?
No.
Will Smith.
Is that?
No.
The designer from the 70s.
Oh, I'm being ignorant.
It's like Cooper Hewitt. So that's really good. Yeah. But hopefully, I mean, usually in September, it's, you know, big time for exhibitions. So I'm sure there's going to be some interesting things coming up. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, you mentioned a few designers from back in the day. Do you have any favorite designers, historically speaking, or is there anyone right now who you haven't mentioned earlier that you really like the work of?
I mean, I think the one that I wrote in my book are probably some of my favorite designers of all times, like people like Rei Kawakubo, for sure, Comme des Garçons, and also Martin Margiela, especially his earlier work. But yeah, I think I did. I also loved Franco Moschino, which is like, the original designer from Moschino. It is one of my favorite designers, even though, interestingly enough, I never write about Italian fashion. I don't know what it is. I think I just never had the chance. But if I did, I would definitely. Is one of the designers that I've been most interested in Italy in the 20th century. So yeah.
Cool. And who would you say are some of your kind of greatest influences, either in terms of your, on your writing or perhaps on your life?
Yeah, as I said, I was really lucky that first of all, I met Valerie Steele right at the right time. And I definitely was very influenced and informed by her books. I mean, at the time I met her, she hadn't wrote all of the books that she wrote now. So it was the earlier work, and then I think I was really lucky again to work with Elizabeth Wilson and Carolyn Evans and Alistair O'Neill for my PhD. And I think those three people really influenced my writing and my way of approaching fashion in general. So I think that's definitely something your PhD committee is something that stays with you, especially if you got lucky and had people whose work you really connected with. So I think that kind of work really informed me. And I think even people going back to my undergraduate thesis advisor, she was a medievalist, but she worked on gender studies, Madeleine Caviness. I think there's so many people that inform who you are as a scholar by the time you're my age. So yeah, I was very lucky to encounter so many generous and like really knowledgeable people. Yeah.
And would you have any advice for, early career academics who are kind of like trying to find their feet in in the murky depths of academia?
I don't know. I think you really should do something you're passionate about. Because I feel like it took me a while to find what I was passionate about. And beforehand, I felt like it was hard to, it was much harder. And once you find something you're passionate about, I know it sounds super kind of cheesy, but it does help, because it does take a while to get, to get going with academia. Yeah, so that's one way to endure the lengthy ways.
I think you've got to do something you're passionate about, and you've got to take a lot of knocks and stick at it. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think it does take a while. I think people perhaps get discouraged because it's such a long-term thing, and we are used to having much more immediate responses to what we do. But yeah, that's long time. The tempo of academia is just very slow.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind.
What was your first publishing output? Was it like in a journal, or was it a book chapter or something? Can you remember?
Yeah, you know what? I first published like an exhibition review in Fashion Theory. So I think that's a good way. I mean, I think you would more than us. It's like, do book review, exhibition review. That's such a good way to start publishing in journal and building your publishing career before you do a full-length article. So I think that's also a good way to like get comfortable with writing, submitting.
Yeah, that's always my top tip, because also there's, it's probably not going to be peer reviewed and critiqued to the same level, of course. And reviews editors are always desperate for key reviewers. So that would be my advice for anyone out there who is looking to get published, to start off by approaching all the reviews editors first and foremost. You can build your reputation for someone who can be trusted to, provide the quality work to a deadline. But, you're not going to have 24 rounds of revisions before the thing actually gets published either,
True.
So
yeah, that is very true. Yeah.
I was going to also ask you what's next on the horizon. I know we're doing this book together, but which will be out, I guess, at the end of next year, I think. It's still in the early stages, I know.
Yes.
But what else are you working on? Or what will you be looking?
My next project will be my next monograph hopefully it might also be an exhibition, would be looking at fashion in the wake of new materialism and post-humanism. And so I will look at, again, focusing on body embodiment, but idea of, I would look at designers and artists that work with biodesign, cell culture, biocultures, as well as ideas of prosthesis in fashion. And so I think that will be my next big research project, which is in the beginning stages. But yeah, so yeah,
well, that's exciting.
A lot of work ahead of me. Yeah.
Well, that's the nature of academia. There's always something else to write about. There's always publishers pressurizing you to do it. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Well, look, I want to thank you for your time.
Yes.
It's been really nice chatting. Unless anyone else has any final questions or thoughts, or unless there's anything else you would like to, any shout outs or anything else you would like to say, Francesca, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and it's been a real pleasure to have you as a guest. And I'm really looking forward to the book coming to fruition, because it's really based on some fascinating work and themes. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for all of you who came, and lovely questions, both yours and the audience. Yeah, and enjoy this humid. Well, I don't know where you are, but if you are in New York, it's a humid day, unsurprisingly.
Yeah, it is. I've been sat in my bedroom all day, but now I'm in the dining room, and yeah, I've got the aircon on, and unfortunately, but yeah, I'm in Brooklyn, so yeah, it's been another humid one.
Yes. No, after the 106 degree, I'm like, I haven't turned on the air conditioning at all.
No. I was going to say,
I'm like heat proof. I can go into like the fire. Anyway,
you'll be getting jackets out soon. If this new.
Right.
Well, okay. Thank you so much, Francesca. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll be back again next Thursday, and it's Women's Equality Day, International Women's Equality Day. So I'm going to be looking at women in publishing and equality in publishing. So we're going to have a few more guests than usual. We're going to have, I think, probably 4 sort of major players, major female sort of protagonists within the publishing industry. So we'll be discussing that. So that's going to be an interesting one. So please join in for that. And if anyone wants to rewatch this, or take down any notes from the things that Francesca said, it's going to be available on our, Intellect Books Instagram feed. And then if you go back into the Instagram TV section, you can also see all the recent interviews, which is one of the silver linings from this pandemic. We've been having this wonderful opportunity to have all these conversations, although not in person, but virtually at least. So yeah, thank you for joining, and Francesca, thank you again so much. It's been a pleasure. Congratulations on all your achievements, and can't wait for the monograph and also the forthcoming book with Intellect too.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Yeah.
Yeah.